So how do the RAW files coming out of the iPhone 17 Pro compare to the RAW files coming out of a full-frame professional level camera, my Nikon Z7 II? Well, I recently went out to the mountains with both cameras, took a bunch of shots. That way we can do some side-by-side comparisons and see how the image quality stacks up. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive right in. So here in Lightroom, I have all the shots that we're going to look at today. Before we do that though, I do want to point out that the iPhone can shoot a couple of different types of RAW files. So there's the normal RAW files and then there's ProRAW files. The ProRAW files have Apple's computational photography baked in. So this includes things like image stacking, noise reduction, sharpening, exposure adjustments, and probably some other stuff. ProRAW files tend to look fairly close to a finished image because of all that processing. Normal RAW files, on the other hand, do not have any of that processing baked in and will require editing to make the image look good. One of the main benefits of RAW files in general is that they allow for maximum editing flexibility, including the ability to shift color and exposure without much sacrifice in image quality. Apple's ProRAW files are designed to allow good editing flexibility while also including the benefits of their computational photography. In the iPhone's native camera app, you have the ability to shoot ProRAW, but not normal RAW. I think it's kind of dumb that they don't allow that in the native camera app, but that's a topic for another day. So in order to shoot normal RAW files, you need to use a third-party app such as Pro Camera, which is the one that I use. The app also allows me to shoot manually and adjust the shutter speed and ISO. In this video, we're going to be looking at both ProRAW and normal RAW examples. There are some limitations I need to cover real quick before we jump in though. So ProRAW files are available to shoot at 48 megapixels, whereas with normal RAW files we are limited to 12 megapixels. And I also noticed when shooting ProRAW images with manual ISO and shutter speed values that those values were not actually used. So the image metadata consistently had values other than what I manually set. I think it does output a fairly equivalent exposure of what is manually set, but it will do so using whatever settings and computational techniques that it decides to use. So the normal RAW files do not have this issue at all, so the settings I manually set are actually what is used for those. Alright, so anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at our first comparison. So we have a 48 megapixel ProRAW image on the left, shot with the iPhone's 4x telephoto lens, and then on the right we have a 45 megapixel Nikon RAW file, and right away we can see the difference that the ProRAW file gives the image. Just has much more contrast baked in here. You may have also noticed that the images have different aspect ratios as well. The iPhone is a 4:3 and Nikon is 3:2. And also keep in mind that when we view images globally like this, each image is only taking up around 4 to 4.5 megapixels of area on my computer monitor. So you're really not going to be able to determine the image quality of 48 megapixels unless we zoom into 100%. And then we have a 1:1 pixel ratio between the images and the computer monitor. Now we can really see what's going on in these images. So the level of detail and clarity in the Nikon image is much better to my eye. I mean, the phone image is still good considering it's from a tiny sensor and lens, but there's no question that the image on the right is better. Now, the Nikon image does look more dull as far as color and contrast, but remember that RAW files are meant to be edited in order to bring them to life. So next I have similar shots, but they are underexposed. We're going to go ahead and bring up the exposure and then take a look at the images. This will give us a sense of dynamic range and how malleable the images are for editing. So I'm just going to take this iPhone shot and I'll just drag up the exposure. Something like that. And then I'll copy and paste that adjustment into the Nikon file. And now even globally I can see a huge difference. The ProRAW image could not really handle that kind of adjustment very well. The image looks like very smudgy. Let's look at 100%. I can see that there's some noise introduced in the Nikon file, but the detail holds together very well. The iPhone shot has really fallen apart here. Alright, next I have another 48 megapixel ProRAW example, and both images look fine globally, and once again we can notice more processing baked into the iPhone shot as well. If we take a closer look, we see again that there's a pretty big difference in terms of detail. The full frame camera and lens is just giving us a much higher quality image than the phone. That said, the phone image is still okay, especially if you're not pixel peeping like we are right now. Alright, so next I want to compare the ISO performance. So for the 4x telephoto camera on the iPhone, the base ISO when shooting manually is ISO 16. The Nikon camera has a base ISO of 64. Also, for this test, I used normal RAW files on the phone since, as I mentioned earlier, the manual settings aren't retained when shooting ProRAW. And also remember that normal RAW files can't be shot at 48 megapixels on the phone, so we're going to be at 12 megapixels here. For the Nikon images, I just downscaled them to a 12 megapixel TIFF file, just because I think it'll be easier to view the images at the same resolution. So globally, the images look much more similar now. You know, we don't have all that ProRAW processing baked in. And if we take a closer look, there's really not much difference that I'm seeing here. I think that the iPhone at 12 megapixels in normal RAW mode, it's much better than that 48 megapixel ProRAW. It looks really similar to this downscaled Nikon file. It's pretty awesome for a phone. Next, we have both images at ISO 64. I'm already starting to notice more noise on the iPhone RAW file, but it's still looking good overall. Moving to ISO 100 for both cameras now. I'm noticing the iPhone continuing to get noisier, whereas the Nikon image is still super clean. ISO 200 now, and the pattern continues. Just seeing more noise on the iPhone, whereas I haven't really perceived a difference on the Nikon yet. At ISO 400, the difference is just getting bigger, so the amount of noise in the iPhone shot is almost to the point where I wouldn't want to use it. I'm also noticing a pretty big drop in detail. Switching to ISO 800, the iPhone shot is now really noisy. The Nikon image looks very clean still. At ISO 1600, we see the pattern continue. ISO 3200 now. I'm seeing noise introduced on the Nikon now, but overall the image is still pretty clean. The iPhone shot is just a noisy mess at this point. And here's ISO 6400. You can really see a huge difference. There's more noise on the Nikon as well, but the image is still usable. Really can't say the same thing for the iPhone shot. Let's go ahead and look at the base ISO compared to ISO 6400 for each camera. Here's the iPhone versus the iPhone. And here's the Nikon versus the Nikon. Definitely a pretty big difference. Alright, so next I have some base ISO shots that are underexposed and overexposed. I'll go ahead and drag the exposure up for the iPhone shot. I've already lifted the exposure and downscaled a Nikon file, so no need to copy and paste. And once again, we see that the iPhone is not great at handling that type of adjustment, whereas the Nikon still looks pretty good. We can go ahead and zoom into 100% for a better look. This is definitely a pretty good illustration of the limitations of a smaller sensor. Let's go ahead with the overexposure test now. I'll just bring down the exposure on this iPhone shot. Something like that. I've already done the adjustment to the Nikon file. And here we see that both cameras handle that adjustment pretty well. The iPhone shot's definitely holding together much better than it did on the underexposure test. I do notice maybe a slight color shift on the iPhone image, but it's really not too bad or anything. So everything we looked at so far is with the 4x telephoto lens. Let's go ahead and run through some similar tests with the main 1x camera, since that tends to be the best camera on the phone. Here we are using a 48 megapixel ProRAW image again. Globally, the images look pretty comparable. You can ignore the light leak on the sides of the iPhone shot. The filter I use doesn't fit the new form factor perfectly, which caused that. But anyway, let's take a closer look. Here I'd say the Nikon looks a little bit better, but I don't think the iPhone is too far behind in this particular shot. We're really able to see a lot of detail here. The mountain in the back doesn't look as crisp in the phone, but these trees and everything look pretty good to me. Next, let's do a 48 megapixel ProRAW underexposure test. So I've lifted the exposure on both of these images, and once again the iPhone doesn't look good here after doing that, whereas the Nikon still holds together pretty well. If we zoom into 100%, you can see that the iPhone shot is pretty much garbage here. And here's one more 48 megapixel ProRAW example with the main 1x lens. I'm seeing a sharper result out of the Nikon. The iPhone shot is still pretty good though. It does produce a nice image. Alright, so next let's go ahead and take a look at the ISO performance with the main 1x camera, which has a base ISO of 50 when shooting manually. We're going to go ahead and switch back over to 12 megapixel normal RAW files for this, and the Nikon files will once again be downscaled to 12 megapixels as well. So here at the base ISOs, there's really not a significant difference. To me, they look about equally as sharp here. There's a lot of fine detail in both of these shots. The color looks good. I think the iPhone's giving the Nikon a run for its money in this case. Moving to ISO 100, both images are still very clean. I'm noticing a hair more noise on the iPhone shot right now. Here's ISO 200. Getting a bit more noise on the iPhone, but it's still holding together pretty well. ISO 400, same pattern continues. There's more noise on the iPhone shot. The Nikon looks clean still. ISO 800 now. I think the iPhone shot is still usable with a little noise reduction, but it's starting to get to that point where it's too noisy to use. ISO 1600. The Nikon is still looking great. I'm noticing more noise on the iPhone shot, as well as a drop in the fine detail. Now at ISO 3200. Too much noise now on the iPhone for my taste. The Nikon shot is still looking really good. There's a little bit of noise, but not too much. ISO 6400. We now have a hot mess with the iPhone. The Nikon image is still more than usable though. And now at ISO 12500, the iPhone looks pretty awful. The Nikon looks noisy as well, but it's not even close to what we're seeing from the phone. Alright, so next we have some base ISO underexposure and overexposure tests using the main 1x lens. Let's go ahead and bring the exposure up. I've already done it on the Nikon file. So the iPhone shot has obviously fallen apart a bit. I mean, there's a ton of noise, a lot of the color information is gone, and the image just looks bad overall. We can see on the right that the Nikon is still looking good after that same adjustment. Next, let's go ahead and take an overexposed file and bring the exposure back down. I've already made that adjustment on the Nikon file. And here I'm seeing some color shifts, but I do think both cameras handle that type of adjustment fairly well. But it does look like the full frame camera is better. Alright, so after all these tests, what's my conclusion here? Well, I think if you're shooting RAW on the iPhone, you should stick to 12 megapixel normal RAW using the base ISO. That gives us really good image quality, which I think is pretty comparable to the full frame camera. I mean, I'm not really a fan of the 48 megapixel ProRAW images. I mean, yeah, you can get some good shots using that mode, but I just found the 12 megapixel normal RAW files to be better. Now, if you're lifting exposure heavily or doing major image adjustments, then the iPhone image will fall apart a lot faster than a full frame image will. So I think the full frame definitely beats the iPhone in that regard. The ISO performance is also way better on the full frame camera. You can really crank that ISO up quite a lot before you get a ton of noise introduced. Whereas with the phone, we start seeing noise pretty much right away as we start to increase that ISO. I do think the phone camera is an amazing tool and you can definitely capture awesome shots with it. That said, I don't think it's able to replace a dedicated camera, even with all that computational photography. I think there's just too much benefit to having a larger sensor, better lens options, not to mention better handling and image control that comes with a dedicated camera. But anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, check out the video description for a Sandmark discount code if you're interested in iPhone photography gear. But anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you on the next video.